All right. How you doing, Addison?
Hey, good. How you doing?
Doing good, man.
You have an
Uh,
insane collection back there. I mean, I can't see any of them, but wow, I'm impressed.
yes, I got Blu-rays and then DVDs, and then I also got
Uh-huh.
VHS over here. So we're good.
Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic.
I just watched Hypochondriac this morning. This movie floored me. I was just like, I'm so
Oh,
into it, and some of the scenes were insane, but I like the emotional aspect of it, and I like
yeah,
the message that it gave as well. So overall,
yeah.
great job on the movie.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's funny because I'm like the posters behind me, and like the guy playing me is also right here. So like I'm taking the form for here just to like have the wolf here. Anyway, thought that was a fun little tidbit.
That's awesome.
But yeah, thanks for saying
So,
that. I really appreciate it.
so how did you come up with the idea for this movie?
Yeah, so I had a mental breakdown, as it says in the beginning of the movie, based on a mental breakdown. Spoiler alert, it's my mental breakdown. And ultimately, the very short version of it is I lost full functioning of my arms for 6 months. I couldn't lift after an injury at work. I couldn't lift my phone. I couldn't eat food with a fork. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't shave. And while that was happening, my mother, who's bipolar, was leaving voicemails telling me not to trust my friends. And then also Dr. Google was telling me that I was dying of ALS. So that confluence of events all kind of convinced me that I was dying, and I broke down. Um, and kind of started writing it in the middle of it as therapy. Very bad version of this draft. I was like gaining functioning in my arms back. I had pillows and ice packs, and I was writing it against the wall, and decided basically after many people were like, Addison, just because it happened doesn't make it interesting. And I'm like, well, that's hard to hear. But I was like, all right, how do I do this? And so basically settled on like an emotional retelling of what it felt like to break down. So there are things that are included in my life. There are things that are not included in my life, but ultimately wanted to tell the perspective of someone who I'm never going to tell you whether something's real or not real, but the scariest part of it is it's real to him. So he's always in danger because he's being attacked by his own mind, and at any point could injure himself in what was happening in the real world, and he wouldn't know it. And that was ultimately how we settled on a style. And that's the movie that you watched this morning, and people will see very soon.
Oh wow, man, that's amazing that is coming from experience.
Yeah,
I never
yeah,
would have
yeah,
imagined it, but I gotta tell you, man, like some of the stuff, like I've heard the stories about the mental health breakdown. You never know what could happen in your life, and
yeah,
exactly. And I think what drove the film, Zach did a great job on this film. He
yeah,
really
yeah,
like resonated, and I loved it that we got to see his journey. He was happy at first, and then once those voicemails hits, that's when everything just started going haywire for him, and
yeah,
like he didn't know who to trust, and
yeah,
there were some very disturbing scenes,
yeah.
and it was so funny. I got to tell a quick story, but during
Please.
the scene where he hears the noises behind the door, like you hear
Oh
the
yeah,
door.
yeah, yeah.
My daughter heard me watching the movie. All of a sudden, she goes, "Hey!" And all of a sudden, that's where it cut off, and I started dying. I'm like just, and it was just so funny that it coincidentally just happened
Yeah,
right there as I was
yeah, yeah,
watching
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And she
That's
started
so
laughing too.
funny.
She goes, "Did that really just stop when I said?" I'm like, "Yes, it did." But I gotta say, man, Zach did an amazing job in this film. The cast did an amazing job, and I liked that emotional aspect. How like his mental breakdown was affecting everyone around him,
Yeah,
especially his boyfriend.
yeah,
And
and
it got
yeah, yeah.
I gotta
So,
wonder, like, what was it like working with? Was it like that intense on the set?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was actually just gonna answer that. I was like, I think I know what you're asking. I think I know what you're asking. Okay, that's what you're asking. Yeah, it's funny because like Zach and Devin are like just have great chemistry just in general. And I spent like a year with Zach before we ended up shooting because the pandemic kind of led us like into isolation for a very long time. And then once Devin joined, like they went off and they came back on set, and all of a sudden it was like they were a couple. And I was like, this is wonderful. And so all of a sudden, all the scenes that I wrote were elevated. And I would say that every time I was directing from each scene, whether it be funny or loving or sad or violent, like we always like were very respectful of the tone of the scene, and I directed and they acted based on the tone of the scene, but we always had each other's backs. And then if there was ever a time people were uncomfortable, they would voice it, and then we would deal with it and we would move on. But that happened very little because it just felt so cohesive. And then by the edit, like when we were going in, I ended up cutting some scenes, and then like people were like, no, that's the touchstone of the whole movie is their relationship. So by the end, you know, when he's in his like greatest state of psychosis, that almost pulls him back, is Luke, is Devon's character. And getting to like to form that in the edit, once we realized that that was the glue of the whole thing, kind of elevated the film into something in which you like really cared for these people and really wanted them to succeed, the more that they failed.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And the rest of the cast was great too. Yumari, who I just saw in another upcoming movie, American Carnage. And,
oh, that's so fun.
And Madeline was great also. I mean, they did such a great job playing these, you know, these characters that want to help him, but they know that they can't. You know, they don't know what to do in his state of mind.
Yeah. And like ultimately, like that was the thing, is like I didn't even know what I was like, you know, it's like the movie is a story of how I asked for help. And I was so scared, and I was hiding so much of myself because I didn't want to be a burden on anybody. But that ultimately led to kerfuffles, because people are like, what's going on with you? And I'm like, I'm fine. And that's what happens with, you know, that's what happens with Zach. You know, that's what happens with my character, is as he continues to ignore the wolf, it becomes more and more violent. And the more you ignore the problems that you have, the worse you're going to get. That's just how life works. And so to get him to the point of, I need help, is the moment of catharsis, and takes like, you know, internal realization, because ultimately no one on the outside can do that for you. You need to be that first person who's like, hey, I need help. Here's everything I'm going through it. And hopefully, if you have good people in your life, the help will come. And it happened in my experience. And so I was very grateful that that happened. And the journey was tough, but I guess ultimately I just want to leave it with like, there's hope. There's hope. I swear that there's hope. Even if you're suffering, like there's a way through. And I'm not saying you will get through it, but it's possible, you know?
Yeah. So finally, what after this movie, is there anything new on the horizon? You got another feature film coming up, or?
I do. I do. I can't really say anything about it, but ultimately the only thing I will say is it's basically like a sequel. Not really. It's not like Hypochondriac to Electric Boogaloo, but it's like this one is the movie where I make a movie about how one asks for help. The next one is basically telling the story of the journey after, of going through the trauma, coming out the other side, and still being able to lead with empathy, and how that's basically a superpower.
So basically like a spiritual sequel, if you will.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the best way to.
Yeah, it's definitely a spiritual sequel.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome. Hypochondriac is coming out on July 29th in theaters. Everyone needs to see this. Not only is it a great LGBTQ like horror film, but it gives a really good message about mental health. And Addison, this is great to hear that this came from your actual story.
Yeah.
And I hope people do resonate with it, and they get the message as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for watching and talking. I really appreciate it. This is great.
You take care and you stay safe.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.